Thank you for tuning in to Short Fiction Lab. You're listening to Last Life. His white moonlight made her fall into the zombies. This life she built her own fortress. A zombie apocalypse story. Part 1. The Second Chance. Lena woke up gasping. She sat up in bed and pressed her hands to her face. Her skin was smooth, no scars, no bite marks on her forearm. No dried blood under her fingernails from the last night she could remember. The night she'd been running through a parking lot in the dark, and the ground had come up to meet her face. And she'd looked back and seen Kyle's mistress standing there with her foot still extended from where she'd kicked Lena's ankle out from under her. She'd gone down hard. Her palms had torn open on the asphalt. She'd tried to get up, but the dead were already on her from 3 sides, and she'd heard Kyle's voice through the fence, calm, almost quiet, telling the group they had to keep moving. He hadn't looked back either. She was alive. She was whole. And the room around her was her old apartment, the one where she had stayed before the apocalypse and where Kyle had come for the breakup dinner when the dead flooded the streets. Lena climbed out of bed slowly. Her legs were steady. She walked to the kitchen and turned on the faucet. Cold, clean water ran over her fingers. She checked her phone. The date read March 14th. She sat down at the kitchen table and stared at that date for a long time. She had died on a Tuesday, 47 days into the outbreak. She had been dead, or whatever this was, and now she was sitting in an apartment she used to rent, on a date that was exactly 2 months before everything ended. 2 months before the first reported case. 2 months and 4 days before the quarantine zones went up. About 60 days before the world stopped making sense. Lena put the phone face down on the table. She pressed her palms flat against the wood and breathed. She was a nurse. She had spent 6 years working triage in a city hospital. She knew how to keep calm when everything was falling apart. She pulled that training up now like a tool from a bag and used it. Okay, think. She remembered everything. Every detail from her first life. The outbreak, the survivors, the routes between safe zones, the buildings that flooded in the first month, the ones that held. She remembered where the National Guard had stockpiled food before they abandoned the distribution center on 4th Avenue. She remembered which roads became impassable after the fires in July. And she remembered Kyle. She remembered his face through the chain-link fence, the way he hadn't even flinched while she screamed. She stood up and went to the desk in the corner of the room. She found a notebook in the drawer and sat down and started writing. She wrote for 2 hours. Dates, locations, names, medical details about the virus. She wrote down what Kyle had done and why. Not for herself. She already knew why, but because she needed it documented somewhere outside her own head. Kyle had wanted her dead. They had grown up together ever since they met for the first time at the orphanage and had been officially dating for 4 years after graduating college. She had found out about Nia, his mistress, 3 weeks before the outbreak. She had not left him yet. He had decided to solve the problem another way. Nia was his first love, his white moonlight, the one that got away and came back to him. Kyle and Nia dated during college, and Lena had often hung out with them as Kyle's childhood friend. In 3rd year, Nia had suddenly broken up with Kyle and moved to another city. Kyle had been heartbroken and opened up with Lena about it after a few months. After graduation, Kyle and Lena had started dating naturally because they had felt like family after almost 15 years knowing each other. At least, that was what Lena had thought. 3 years later, Nia came back to the city looking for Kyle. This had been 11 months before the apocalypse, and Lena had only figured out 3 weeks before the outbreak, which meant Kyle had kept her around as a convenience for 10 months. Apparently, Nia lied to Kyle that the reason why she had left him was Lena whispering to her that she was not worthy of Kyle, and that Lena had been the one growing up with him. Lena had tried to tell Kyle the truth. Nia left the city because she met a wealthy heir. Kyle had not believed her in the past life. He had come to Lena's apartment for dinner for the official breakup on the night the zombie outbreak began. Whether they had liked it or not, they had been stuck together to survive the apocalypse. The first thing he had done was, of course, contact and regroup with Nia, who had not lived far away. Then the 3 of them had joined a survivor group for a better chance at surviving. Being excellent at pretending to be innocent, Nia had whispered things about Lena to the others to make them turn against her, and Kyle'd let her. And on day 47, when the dead came through the parking lot and everyone ran, Nia had stuck her foot out to make her fall down and slow the zombies. and Kyle had kept running. Lena wrote it all down. Then she hid the notebook under the loose floorboard in the bedroom closet and made a list of everything she needed to do. She had 2 months. That was not much time. But it was 2 months more than she'd had the first time around. Part 2. Building the Arsenal. The first thing Lena did was money. She called in every favor, worked extra shifts, and sold nearly everything in the apartment that wasn't essential. She put all of it into supplies. She had worked in a hospital. She knew exactly which medications mattered. She knew which antibiotics saved lives in the weeks after the outbreak, not from bites, but from infected wounds, pneumonia, untreated cuts that went septic because there was no more sterile gauze. She bought amoxicillin, ciprofloxacin, and metronidazole from an online medical supplier. She bought wound closure strips, surgical glue, and suturing kits. She bought enough ibuprofen and acetaminophen to stock a small clinic. She spent a Saturday at a camping store and came home with water filtration systems, fire starters, emergency ration bars, and 3 different kinds of hand-crank flashlights. Weapons were harder. Lena had never owned a gun before her first life. She had learned badly in the weeks after the outbreak. Fumbling with a handgun, someone thrust at her while a dead man clawed at a chain-link fence 10 feet away. This time she did it right. She went to a range and took a basic firearms course, then an intermediate one. She practiced every weekend until loading a magazine felt automatic. She bought a 9mm handgun legally and put it through its paces until she could hit center mass at 25 yards consistently. But guns were loud. In a world full of the dead, loud drew more dead. She also bought a compound bow and spent 3 weeks learning to use it. A crossbow came later, second-hand. She liked it better, slower to reload but more forgiving on accuracy, and the bolts could be retrieved. She found a machete at an outdoor supply store and practiced the movements in her living room until her arms ached. Her body changed in those weeks. She had always been fit. Nursing was physical work, but now she was something different. Leaner, stronger. She started running 5 miles every morning. She did pull-ups in the door frame. She ate with discipline. The location was the hardest problem. She had thought about it carefully. In her first life, her group had made the mistake most groups made. They spread across a neighborhood, defended a perimeter that kept expanding, and burned out their energy-holding ground that the dead just walked around. What worked, she had learned too late, was going vertical. She found it on her 3rd week of searching. The Caldwell Building on Mercer Street, a 12-story residential tower from the 1970s. Solid concrete construction. 2 stairwells, both lockable with industrial deadbolts. A rooftop space with about 800 square feet of planting potential, already fenced. A utility room on the ground floor with its own access to the water risers. It also had tenants, 40-something residents spread across the 12 floors, retirees, young couples, a family on the 3rd floor with 2 small kids. Lena noted this. It was not ideal, but it meant the building was maintained, the systems were working, and there were people inside who would need protecting whether she planned for it or not. She introduced herself to the building manager, a quiet man named Gerald, and rented a unit on the 9th floor. Over the following weeks, she learned the building's systems. She found the elevator control room. She memorized the breaker locations. She identified which apartments were empty and which floors were least occupied. She kept working her hospital shifts. She kept smiling at colleagues. She did not tell anyone what she knew, but she watched. She watched Kyle from a careful distance whenever she saw him near the hospital. He was with Nia, always with Nia, a compact woman with sharp eyes and a way of standing close to Kyle that made their arrangement obvious to anyone paying attention. They looked comfortable, settled, like people who had gotten away with something. Lena watched them and felt nothing except a cold, flat certainty. She was not going to be the thing they got away with. Part 3. The Circle. Lena had a list of names. 6 people she had encountered in her first life who had shown, under pressure, that they were worth trusting. She approached them carefully over 3 weeks as the calendar crept toward May. The first was Dom, a 32-year-old gym teacher with a calm disposition and the kind of physical steadiness that made him useful in a crisis. Lena had seen him carry a badly injured woman for 2 blocks through a crowd of infected in the first week of the outbreak. He hadn't known the woman. He had just done it. She struck up a conversation at his gym over 3 visits. She liked him. He was the same in this life as he'd been in the chaos, methodical, unshowy, reliable. When she finally told him the truth, she started with the science: early warning indicators, infection modeling, hospital chatter. She let him sit with that first, then she told him the rest. He had stared at her for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, what do you need me to do?" That was Dom. The second was Priya, an emergency medicine physician who had kept 3 people alive for 9 days in a parking garage using nothing but a trauma kit and improvisation. Priya listened to Lena's pitch with her arms crossed and an expression that said she was already running counter-arguments. "You know how insane this sounds," Priya said. "Yes," Lena said, "but you've already stockpiled everything, which means you either believe it or you're pathologically cautious." A pause. "I'll come see the building." She came. She stayed. The others arrived over 10 more days. Tyrese, a former Army combat medic now in facilities management. Bex, a hardware store manager with an encyclopedic knowledge of building systems. Lou, a retired firefighter in his 50s who was tired of his retirement. And Cam, a 22-year-old warehouse worker who turned out to be, improbably, one of the most effective fighters Lena had ever seen. 6 people, including Lena. Each of them vetted. Each of them told as much truth as they could absorb. They moved into the Caldwell building in staggered waves. 3 rented units there. They started modifying. They bolted steel plates to the interior of the stairwell doors on floors 9 through 12. They converted Lena's storage unit into a supply cache. They set up the rooftop with fast germinating vegetable trays, Priya's idea. They mapped the building's systems in detail. Dom built a deadfall trap for the stairwell on floor 8, a tilting board weighted with cinder blocks triggered by a tripwire. It wouldn't kill anyone, but it would slow them down and make a lot of noise. Bex figured out how to disable the elevators from the utility room in a way that couldn't easily be reversed from outside. They drilled twice a week. Weapon handling, medical response, communication signals, 3-word radio protocol. Every person had a role and a backup role. They also talked about the other residents. 40-something people who had no idea what was coming. Lena did not tell them the truth. She had tried that math, and it didn't work. Panic before the outbreak would just drive people out into the city. But she introduced herself to the neighbors on her floor. She was friendly with the family on the 3rd floor. She made note of who seemed capable and who seemed fragile. When the time came, she would not abandon these people. She had been abandoned. She knew what it felt like. She was not going to replicate it. Part 4. The Dead Rise. The first reported case appeared on May 16th. A local news alert described a man who had attacked paramedics after being found unconscious on a bus. Severely altered. Unresponsive to verbal commands. Lena texted the group a single word: tonight. They were in the Caldwell building by 6 p.m. All gear moved up. Lena had already shifted the most critical supplies from the basement to the 9th floor. They sealed the stairwell on 8 and activated the elevator lockout. The city was not panicking yet. That would take a few more hours. Lena sat in her apartment and listened to the city sounds below. Traffic, voices, someone laughing on the street. Normal sounds. She knew they wouldn't last. 2 hours went by. Dom knocked at her door. "It's starting," he said. She went to the window. 3 blocks east, a building was on fire. She could hear sirens layered over each other like sound from a broken radio. On the street below, people were moving fast. Some of them were running. The building's other residents began to feel it on the 2nd day. Lena heard doors opening and closing on the floors below. Voices in the stairwell, confused, frightened, pulling each other back and forth between staying and leaving. The family on the 3rd floor had 2 children under 10 and no plan. The retired couple on 4 had a dog that would not stop barking. A young man on 6 named Hector, who worked nights and had missed the first news cycles entirely, knocked on Lena's door at noon, asking if she knew what was happening. She told him enough. She gave him a bottle of water and a set of instructions. Stay inside, stay off the lower floors, don't open the lobby doors for any reason. And she said it in the tone she used in triage, the tone that conveyed that things were serious and that the person she was talking to was capable of handling serious. Hector nodded and went back to his apartment, and as far as she could tell, followed the instructions. Not everyone did. On the 3rd morning, Lena was on roof watch with Cam when they heard the lobby doors slam open below. She leaned over the railing and looked down. 2 men from the 5th floor, She recognized them, brothers who had moved in 6 months ago, were pushing a grocery cart toward the corner store half a block away. They were moving fast and talking loud, their voices carrying in the unnaturally quiet street. "Get inside," Cam said under his breath, watching them. The infected came from the alley between the corner store and the dry cleaner next door. They came fast. That was the thing people got wrong in movies, the thing that had killed more survivors than anything else in Lena's first life. The dead didn't shuffle. Not these ones. They ran. They ran with the single-minded acceleration of something that had lost everything except the drive toward sound, and the two brothers were producing a lot of both. 3 infected hit them in under 4 seconds. The brothers dropped the cart and sprinted back toward the building, screaming. The dead came after them at full speed. The brothers made it through the lobby doors. They slammed them shut. But the dead were hitting the glass panels from outside before the latch caught, and the impact was enough. One panel cracked down the middle, a long fracture that wouldn't hold another run. "Ground team," Lena said into the radio. She and Dom and Cam went down to the lobby. The two brothers were pressed against the far wall, breathing hard, both of them looking at the cracked glass panel where 3 dead faces were smearing against the other side, mouths open, drawn by the movement inside. "Stay back," Lena told them. She assessed the door. The crack hadn't gone all the way through yet, but one more impact would open it. There were 3 infected on the other side. The alley to the left of the building's side entrance was clear. She could see it on the small security monitor Bex had rigged in the lobby. "Side door," she said. "Fast." They went out through the side entrance and came around the front of the building from the right side, where the infected couldn't see them. The dead were still focused on the lobby glass, pressing and hitting. They hadn't registered the new approach. Lena put a crossbow bolt through the back of the first one's skull from 8 feet. It dropped without a sound. Dom swung his fire axe into the second before it could turn, a single clean strike that put it down. The third one spun toward them, fast, and Cam was already moving. He drove the sharpened end of his rebar through its temple and held it pinned against the building wall until it stopped moving. 8 seconds. All 3 down. Lena pulled her bolt free. It was cracked, unusable. She noted that and moved on. Back inside, the 2 brothers from 5 were still against the wall. The older one, she would learn his name was Marco, had a bad cut on his forearm from the broken cart handle. The younger one, Danny, was unhurt but shaking. Lena cleaned and closed Marco's wound at the lobby desk. "How bad does it look?" Marco asked, watching her work. "The cut? You'll be fine. The door panel will need replacing." She taped the last closure strip. "Don't go outside again without telling me first." Marco looked at the lobby door. "What are they?" "Fast," Lena said. "That's the most important thing. They run. They find you by sound and smell. Stop making noise, stop moving, and they lose interest and drift. Make noise, and they don't stop." "How do you know all this?" She didn't answer that. She told him and Danny to go back upstairs and stay there. Over the next 3 days, it happened 2 more times. A woman on the 2nd floor opened her window to call out to someone she thought she recognized on the street and drew 6 infected to the building's south face. An older man on 7 tried to get to his car in the parking bay and ran back into the building with 4 of the dead right behind him, fast enough that they made it through the door before it closed. Each time, Lena's group went down and cleared them. Each engagement taught them something. They got faster, they got quieter. Cam learned to read the dead's movement, a slight head tilt that preceded a sprint. Dom learned how to position himself at a doorway so that infected coming in single file couldn't flank him. Lena learned that her crossbow was best used from a distance, and that inside a lobby corridor, the machete was more practical. They were also saving people, not in a grand way, in the specific, unglamorous way of going down to a lobby and killing 3 or 6 or 8 dead things so that the survivors upstairs didn't get eaten. The building's residents started to understand, slowly, that the group on 9 was the reason the building was still standing. Hector started leaving water bottles outside Lena's door. The family on 3, a couple named Sandra and Pete with their 2 kids, offered their extra canned food. The retired couple on 4, who had finally gotten their dog to stop barking, started helping Bex with the building systems. The building was becoming something. Not a fortress, not yet, but a community with a center of gravity. Lena had not planned for this. She had planned for 6 people. Now she was planning for 47. Part 5. What Kyle did. She found out Kyle was in the city on day 9. Tyrese spotted him from the roof with binoculars, 2 blocks south, moving with a group of about 12 people down the center of the road, carrying supplies. Lena came up and took the binoculars without a word. Kyle was easy to spot. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and he moved the way he always had, with the confidence of someone who assumed the space around him belonged to him. He was carrying a rifle she didn't recognize. Nia was 3 paces behind him, carrying a large pack. She was scanning the street with quick eyes, sharp, watchful. Lena watched them until they turned down a side street and disappeared. "Someone you know?" Tyrese asked. "Yes," she said. She handed back the binoculars. "Keep an eye on where they go." Kyle's group moved into the old parking structure on Grant Street 2 days later. 4 levels, solid concrete, open sides on the upper floors that gave sightlines in 3 directions. Not a bad choice. He'd always been good at reading a room, reading an environment. That was part of what had made him charming in the beginning. She had spent 4 years believing his version of himself. She had excused things she shouldn't have excused because he was good at constructing explanations. He had a gift for making his failures look like misfortunes and other people's discomfort look like overreaction. She had been overreacting, apparently, right up until Nia's foot connected with her ankle in that parking lot. She did not go to the parking structure. She did not send anyone to make contact. She had nothing to say to Kyle that required a conversation. What she did was watch. She kept track of his group's movements through the binoculars and noted their patterns, which direction they went on supply runs, how long they stayed out, how they handled the dead when it happened in front of them. She learned that Kyle was not a good fighter. He was a planner, a talker. He sent other people in first and stayed back to direct. The people in his group who were actually capable, a stocky woman named Bee who moved like she'd had real training, and a quiet man named Rourke who handled a knife with alarming efficiency, did most of the real work. Lena noted all of it. She filed it the way she filed patient data. She was not planning revenge. Revenge was a luxury she couldn't afford. She was planning for every contingency, and Kyle was a contingency. Part 6, The Horde. The warning came from Cam at 2 a.m. on day 23. 3 hard knocks on Lena's door. Emergency signal. She was up and dressed in 30 seconds. "Sound from the east," he said. "Big sound." She went to the roof and stood in the dark and listened. The moaning was different. Not the usual scattered noise of isolated infected or small clusters pulling toward a sound source. This was layered and deep and continuous, like something massive moving through the city at a slow, unstoppable pace. She leaned over the railing and looked east. In the patches where the grid was still lit, she could see them. The street was not a street anymore. It was a mass, a solid, shuffling wall of infected 2 blocks wide, moving west down Birch Avenue toward the center of the city. Individual shapes at the edges, indistinguishable from each other in the dark, but the whole of it was visible as a single living thing. She pulled out the radio. "All stations, wake up, Category 3. She had assigned codes weeks ago. Everyone knew what it meant. "Get to your posts, now." Feet on stairs, lights in the stairwells. The building woke up. "No lights on the lower floors," she said into the radio. "No noise. Everybody still." She stayed on the roof. The sound built and built until she could feel it in her chest, a low vibration from thousands of infected moving through the streets. The leading edge was 4 blocks out, then 3. The smell hit them next, that sour, heavy mass smell that she remembered from her first life and had hoped she would never smell again. Priya came up beside her. "How many?" "Thousands," Lena said. "Stadium District shelter fell. I was expecting this." "You didn't mention it." "I wasn't sure of the timing." They watched. The horde moved west. The Caldwell building was on Mercer, running perpendicular to Birch. If the horde stayed on course, it would miss them by half a block. Lena tracked the leading edge through the binoculars and kept her breathing slow. The radio crackled. "Tyrese, on lower floor watch. Problem. Lights just came on in the parking structure." Lena moved to the north side of the roof and looked. The second level of Kyle's parking structure was lit up. Flashlights moving, someone shouting. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear it, and so could the dead. The leading edge shifted. She watched it happen in real time through the binoculars. The front line of the horde curving left, drawn toward the light and sound from the parking structure. And the parking structure was on Grant Street, and Grant Street fed directly onto Mercer. "If that horde hits Grant Street, it comes right to us," Dom said behind her. She stood at the railing and looked at the parking structure and thought about Kyle inside it, making noise, drawing the dead toward both of them. She thought about Bee and Rourke, who had done nothing wrong. She thought about the 12 people whose names she didn't know. She made a decision. "Dom, Cam, Tyrese, gear up. Priya, coordinate on radio. Bex and Lou hold the building." She was already moving toward the stairwell. "We're going to pull part of the leading edge south down Mercer, away from Grant Street." Dom stared at her. "That means drawing it toward us." "I know what it means. Let's go." They went out through the side door at street level. The sound was enormous now, a physical weight in the air. She led them south to the intersection at Mercer and 5th, away from the building, putting distance between the bait point and their home. Dom had a car horn wired to a portable battery. She nodded at him. He hit it. The blast split the night. The response was immediate. A section of the leading edge, 300 infected, swung south toward the sound. She could see them turning in the binoculars, not thinking, not choosing, just responding to the stimulus the way they always did, immediate and total. Again, then we move. He hit it again. They ran north up Mercer, drawing the section after them. The dead came fast. She could hear them now, not just the mass sound, but individual impacts, feet on asphalt, the specific horrible speed of them closing distance. She and the team cut east through an alley at the right moment and went silent and still in the shadows of a loading bay doorway. The infected ran past, 8 feet away. She could smell them individually now. She pressed flat against the wall and did not breathe. They milled for 30 seconds, deprived of the stimulus, then drifted. The main horde kept moving west, curving away from Grant Street, away from the parking structure, missing the Caldwell building by the half block she had counted on. It took 40 minutes total. 40 minutes of running and hiding and pressing into doorways while the dead moved past. Cam had to kill one that cornered him in a loading bay, fast and silent with his rebar. Tyrese cut his palm on chain link and said nothing until they were back inside. Lena cleaned and bandaged the cut in the 9th floor kitchen. "You saved that parking structure," Therese said. He was watching her work. "I saved 12 people who don't know why they're still alive," she said. "Kyle's in there." "I know. You still did it." She taped the last strip down. "Yes, because 12 people who didn't do anything to me are also in there." She put the kit away. "Kyle doesn't get to cost me those 12 people." Tyrese looked at his hand. "Okay." "Get some sleep," she said. Part 7. The Confrontation. Kyle came to the Caldwell building on day 26. He came without warning, just appeared at the front door with Nia beside him and 4 others from his group, and knocked. Hard. The way someone knocks when they've decided they're not going to be ignored. Lena watched him on the lobby camera for a moment before she went down. She took Dom and Tyrese with her. She told Cam to stay on the roof. She opened the door but did not step back from it. Kyle looked at her. Something moved across his face. Surprise, quickly managed. "Lena, I heard someone had organized the Caldwell." "Kyle." He spread his hands slightly. Same gesture he had always used. "We should work together. You've got a strong position here. We have numbers and firepower. It makes sense." "When did you and Nia reconnect?" Lena said. He blinked. "What?" "You and her were cheating on me." He looked at her with an expression she recognized, the one where he was deciding how much of the real thing to show. "I don't see how that's relevant right now." "I do." Lena kept her voice level. "You had been with Nia for 11 months. I had found out 3 weeks before the outbreak, and you knew I was going to leave." She paused. "You decided it would be more convenient if I didn't." Nia's face did not change. That was interesting. No denial, no performance of confusion, just stillness. Kyle's jaw tightened slightly. "You're not being rational." She looked at Nia. Nia looked back at her without expression, the way someone looks when they've decided they don't owe the other person anything, not even a lie. "My people know what you are." She put her hand on the doorframe. "Here's what I'll do. Anyone in your group who wants to come here, individually, voluntarily, can come and be evaluated. If they're decent and capable, they're in. But you and Nia don't set foot in this building." Kyle looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You'll need people." "I have people," Lena said. "Go back to your parking structure, Kyle." She closed the door. Over the next 2 days, 5 people from Kyle's group came to the Caldwell building. They came one at a time, in the way people come when they've finally decided something they've been deciding for a while. B came first, then Rourke, then 3 others whose names Lena learned over the following days: a woman named Cassie, who had been a paramedic, and 2 brothers named Felix and Jordan, who had carried their elderly neighbor 8 blocks on the first day of the outbreak because they hadn't wanted to leave her. Kyle and Nia and 2 others stayed in the parking structure. Lena did not watch the parking structure after that. She had her own building to run. Part 8. What the parking structure couldn't hold. She heard it on the morning of day 31, not a horde, a smaller sound, screaming. She went to the roof. Cam was already there with the binoculars. He handed them over without a word. The parking structure's second level. Something had gotten in during the night. She could see broken fencing on the north corner where the open side met the ramp barrier. Infected were moving on the second level. Not dozens, just 6 or 8, but in an enclosed concrete space with nowhere to run. 6 was enough. She could see people on the third level trying to climb to the roof. She could see Kyle. She was almost certain it was Kyle, at the back of the third level, away from the ramp, away from the others. She could see Naya at the front, between Kyle and the ramp. 2 of the infected from the second level were coming up the ramp. They were fast. The people on the third level scattered. Lena watched through the binoculars. She watched Kyle move. He moved toward the roof access ladder at the back of the structure. He did not stop for Naya. He had always been good at decisions that benefited himself. That had never changed. Nia turned and saw him going. She ran after him. She caught his sleeve. He shook her off. The infected were 15 feet away, then 10. Nia was between Kyle and the ramp, and between the infected and Kyle. It lasted about 4 seconds. Lena lowered the binoculars. "We should go," Cam said quietly. "Yes. Do we help?" She thought about the other people in that parking structure, the ones who had stayed with Kyle for reasons of their own. How many are still up there? Looks like 3 made it to the roof. 3 people who had made choices she hadn't been part of and couldn't judge. "Get Dom and Tyrese. We go to the north alley and draw the infected out onto the street. Then we bring those 3 people back here. And Kyle?" She had not seen Kyle make the roof. She had not seen him not make it. She didn't know, and she realized it was not the thing she needed to resolve. "We bring whoever needs help," she said. "Let's go." The operation took 20 minutes. They drew 3 infected out of the parking structure into the street and killed them there. Clean, fast, efficient. The other 3 they left for the people on the roof to handle or not. Then they cleared the second-level ramp with B helping now, who fought with the controlled aggression of someone who had been waiting for a reason to be useful, and they brought the 3 survivors down and back to the Caldwell building. None of them were Kyle. None of them were Nia. Lena did not ask what had happened on that roof. If any of the 3 wanted to tell it later, they could tell it later. Right now they needed food and water and the specific kind of quiet that comes after something terrible, and those were things she could provide. Part 9. What comes after day 31. The building held 23 people now. Lena's original 6, the other Caldwell residents who had survived and chosen to stay, and the people who had come over from Kyle's group in 1s and 2s. The rooftop had its first germinated seedlings. The supply cache was intact. Tyrese's hand was healing cleanly. The family on 3, Sandra and Pete and their 2 kids, had been given the apartment directly beside Lena's team's main operations floor, and Sandra had turned out to have spent a decade in logistics, which made her more useful than almost anyone. Lena sat on the roof on the morning of day 31 and looked at the city, still burning in places, smoke in columns from the north and east, the sounds of the dead at a constant low background frequency, distant now but permanent. The world she had grown up in was gone. She had saved her people. She had built something that held. She had not saved everyone. She had not found a cure or a government radio signal or a safe zone with walls and a generator. She was a nurse with a crossbow in a fortified high-rise looking at a burning city. But she was here. 23 people were here because of choices she had made with the time she'd been given back. Dom came up with 2 cups of coffee, rationed, real coffee, and handed her one. Priya's been looking at maps, he said. There's a community college campus 8 miles north. Larger footprint, agriculture space, creek for water access. I know that campus. She had put it on her list in the first weeks. You've thought about this. I've thought about everything, she said. He nodded and drank his coffee. Below them, the city moved in its altered way. The dead and the living sorting themselves into whatever the world was going to be. Lena thought about the parking structure. She thought about Kyle moving toward the ladder while Nia grabbed his sleeve. She had thought once that she wanted him to understand what he had done. She had wanted him to know that she knew, that it mattered, that there was a reckoning. But the world had arranged its own reckoning in the end, in the blunt and indifferent way the world did, not as justice, not as punishment, just as consequence. He had spent his whole life stepping over other people to get to the safer ground. Eventually, there was no safer ground left. She felt no satisfaction in it. She felt something quieter than that. She felt the particular calm of a person who has put something down after carrying it for a long time. She thought about Marisol, the 7-year-old on the 3rd floor who had asked her if it was safe here. She thought about the look on the girl's face when Lena had said yes and meant it. She had been given a second chance, and she had used it the way she knew how. She had been a nurse in both lives. Nurses didn't save everyone. They triaged. They made hard calls about where help was needed most. They held things together with what they had. She finished her coffee. She handed Dom back the cup. She picked up her notebook and opened it to a new page. At the top she wrote, Day 31. Group 23. Supplies stable. Next, assess route to Millfield Community College. She paused. Then she wrote one more line. We are still here. She closed the notebook, tucked it under her arm, and went back inside to get to work. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like this video and subscribe to support our channel so that I can bring more stories like this to you.